So then we are back with more information regarding the scriptures from the Aramaic scriptures, and that's the New Testament or Renewed Covenant translation. And there is a very important topic regarding the nation of Israel and their purpose in the plans of the Creator Yahweh. It's very evident in Revelation, the 20th chapter, 9th verse, that the camps in the future would be then in place. So also in 61st chapter of Isaiah, it states the nation of Israel being cleaned up. It was a prophecy that Yeshayahu or Isaiah saw of the future. He saw the nation then being cleaned up, the geographical area of Israel would then, those pagan people that are living in their land, they would be converted to the Mashiach. And then they would serve the city in order for the city then to teach and form another group to form another holy land. So this is what Yeshayahu was explaining. So then, we understand after the ascension of Yahshua, he did explain in detail the task of going out in groups, and they would form holy lands. And this task is not done properly. So then in Revelation, the 20th chapter, the 9th verse, we understand very perfectly that there are going to be camps. So then the same way that Yahweh, the great shepherd, shepherded them out of Egypt, brought them near to the mountain, and then from there gave his holy laws, and they trained for more than 1,000 years before the coming of Yahshua. And then afterwards they themselves would go out and then would make holy lands, and they would then shepherd the Gentiles out of the world as they themselves were in Egypt in the world. And they were rescued from the world. So this concept from the Creator never changed. That's why in Revelation, the 20th chapter, 9th verse, it states, and the camps of the set apart, those that are outside of Israel, they must set up holy lands to maintain the integrity of the entire salvation plan. So then we understand the many wars that goes on in the world, they are in fact in a great part of it. It's because Israel is not doing their job in terms of being in their camps. Because the salvation plan includes then the nation of Israel, the Hebrew brothers, to be in their camps around the world and not to be involved in the world's trade. They were to be concerned only with the government of the kingdom to come from Yahweh. So then they would be served by the Gentiles, and they would be engaged in teaching other groups, and then in exchange for it, the Creator provided the 7 spirits of Himself in the form of ministrations. So then the Gentiles outside will be more and more and more and more increasing the faith. So it works both ways. But the Hebrews should never be involved in a world's trade. They were not made for it. The world's trade is only for the Gentiles. That's why the Torah came into the world for the Hebrews, only to be used in their camps. There are levels of capacity. The Creator did bring them out from Egypt. He gave His holy laws to the set apart Hebrews. He did not give His holy laws to the pagans. So the line of salvation ever since they came out of Egypt remains the same to this day until the closing of this age. So then we begin to understand what it means of having the instructions and the capacity of the instructions, and then the Gentiles and the capacity of faith. That's why it's important having the proper Bible. The Aramaic is the closest translation that maintains the integrity of the set-apart Hebrews versus the Gentiles. The Torah, the instructions should never be in the world. They should always be in their camps. That's why in Revelation, the 20th chapter, 9th verse states very plainly, and they would go around and encircle the camps. Camps, that's plural, the many camps of the Hebrews, because in the camps they are protected. And then the beloved city means in the near future they are going to be in their camps. The Hebrews are not to be involved with the world's trade. That's why Yahshua, when he was given the chance of being the king of the world during that time of the most important nation, he refused. He fled to the mountain and he was there praying. Why? Because he was not to be involved in the world's trade. It would come politics, it would come junk of the world. And the set-apart Hebrews, they were only to be concerned with the government of the kingdom to come from Yahweh. That's why Israel today is without a purpose, and they are only involving themselves in area very detrimental to the Gentile world, because they were never meant to be involved in the world's trade. The world's trade is only for the Gentiles. The Hebrews must be in their camps, obeying what the Creator told them to do ever since they were saved from Egypt. They had a covenant with Him, and they have a covenant with Him, and they are breaking His covenant. In Hebrew understanding, if you break the covenant, you pay with a life. And then the world is paying then the penalty of a broken covenant, because the world has let them to be mixed with them. So then if we have an understanding of the Creator's plan of salvation ever since they themselves were saved from Egypt, then we must encourage them to return to their camps. They must release their hands from the world's trade. They were not made for it. They were made to be absolutely loyal to the Torah 100% in their camps. That's why the Creator had a covenant with them. And it has to be maintained. That's why church systems outside of the camp are non-existent. Because we were only to be ministered by the set-apart people through the 7 spirits of Elohim in form of ministrations. So then our faith is increased every time. So then we begin to understand why, for instance, during the Second World War there was so much hatred towards the Hebrew people. Because they were not meant to be involved with other nations. And Hitler, he knew they had to get out, but he was not a saved person in the Messiah. He did not understand the salvation plan ever since the time of Egypt. But he knew there was a link with them, the Hebrews, being out of their nation, because they were in a nation that was not from their own. If they were in a German area and they were having camps and only maintained the Torah for themselves, it would have been fine. But then they involved themselves in a government of a nation not of their own, and they begin to impose the Torah. That's very deadly. The Torah is not to be used in the world. It has to use only in the camps. Only in the camps. And then obviously later then the burning of the Hebrews. What was the significance of the burning? It would be a whole lot simpler to dig a hole in the ground and throw them on the ground and cover them up. Why were they burned? Why did they spend fuel in burning bodies? It's because of the biblical understanding. Those that are not in the Mashiach, then the cultivator takes them away and they are burned. There is a biblical principle that went on during the Second World War in Germany. A biblical principle. The Hebrew people, they must be in their camps so they don't interfere with the Gentiles' trade, because they have laws, heavenly laws, that must not be involved in the world. That's not from the Hebrews, that's coming from the Creator. And then the world, then every time they get in trouble because they don't understand the distinction. There are a couple of groups, set apart people, Hebrews, and then the rest Gentiles. The Bibles, they are mixing them both, and they should never be mixed. Because the Creator gave the example. He brought them out of Egypt and then brought them to the desert, where they would be set apart for a long time. So the principle of being set apart was then placed in them, so then in the future they would become then the set apart people in tiny areas around the world, and they would rescue the Gentiles from the world system into their system, into the government of a kingdom to come system. That's their function. And in order to do that, in order for them to be the shepherds of the Gentiles, they would be granted with the 7 spirits of Elohim, 7 ministrations. So then when the Gentiles with their own problems in the world, they would come and inquire of Yahweh, as the nations did during the time of Shimon or Solomon, then the same way they would come to their gates to find out answers and make inquiries of Yahweh. The principle never changed. So begin to think as in Hebraic understanding from the time of Egypt. The Hebrew people, they are not to be involved in a world. They are not to be mixed and wandering around. They were put together to be in camps. They must be separated from the world. That's why they are named set apart. Set apart people. Those people are always to be set apart. During the time of Germany, if they were in Germany area, born in Germany, if they would be in their camps, nice and quiet, simply teaching the kingdom to come to the people, to the Gentiles that would come to their gates. The Hebrew people are not to go out other than waiting for the Gentiles to come to them. The war wouldn't have taken place. Because the dam covenant made with Abraham then was honored. There was no reason for war. There are granted other reasons for war, but the most important part in terms of the Creator is making sure He set apart people that are in camps. So then the world of the Gentiles can function. Otherwise the Gentiles can't function properly, because they are imposed upon them, and many times without them knowing it, that there is a broken covenant made with Abraham, and then they are mixing themselves with the world, and then comes deadly consequences. Because in the spirit they impose the Torah, and the Torah is only to be used in their camps. That's why in the capacity of the set apart, they must be 100% loyal to the Torah and the instructions, and the prophets, obviously. But then in the Gentiles' capacity, only faith. Our part is only having faith in the Mashiach, and then we receive the ministrations of the 7 spirits of Elohim through them, through the Hebrews. because they were taught from the Creator ever since they left Egypt. So the Creator is not asking of them what they can't do. They were shown. The Creator Himself did for them, and they would do then in the future as He did. So then people begin to understand what it means. And there is a very interesting section in Hebrew. It is Hebrew, the 7th chapter, explains the importance of the camps. Because then Yahshua said, whatsoever Moses said for you to do and observe these, do and observe. He was speaking these words to the scribes and the people of the law. Why did he say this? Because then in the future they had to set up holy lands around the world, and they would have to place then the tabernacle in exactly way that Moses' laws came from the mountain from Yahweh, and then they would minister to the Gentiles. Watch this. And then, but as there is a change in the priestly line, so also is there a change in the instructions regarding to the Levitical or the Levitical priests. What does it mean? Means the priestly line ever since Moses never changed, except when Yahshua came, the substitution of animals for His own presence. This is what He's speaking of. Instructions were changed. But they had to maintain the rotation, maintain the worship, maintain the services as it was before. That's why then in Revelation, camps. That's why it means camps. So then people are more aware of those areas of the tabernacle or the tent. They were never abolished. Only an area was simply completed. It had a substitution from the den of animals to the presence, nearing line, and then the nearing line was then established. The Spirit that we hear, the line of the Spirit that we hear, it was set in Shavuot for the benefit of the Gentiles, but had to be maintained. That's why later in Revelation states a very interesting point, that then there were the spirits, and in this case was then the souls shadow of the Spirit under the altar. Those people, they were slain. They had a link in the spirit of their spirits with a nearing line, and they would be nearing the camp where they were at, and that's where they were found. And then as we understand, in a camp they have a direct vision from heaven. Would be as similar as having a private television signal, only available in the camps. It's a secured line of a vision from heaven, and that's what they saw. They saw the souls, but the souls in this case in the form of the shadow in the spirit. Okay, so then those were slain, and then the others, then obviously they were asking themselves, and for how long, for how long, for how long? Gave us an understanding the way the spiritual understandings of the spiritual world outside the camp meant. They are born again, so their spiritual link is linked, as Adam was. So then they had to link themselves then further with the nearing line. Then this nearing line was then linked with the Holy of Holies of each camp. And then they have a direct line towards heaven. And then the elders, then obviously they were there and they saw the souls in the form of a shadow of a spirit. They were slain, but they were there near the altar, or under the altar, should say. And then they were asking, for how long, for how long, for how long? And they said, it is granted to you the white robes. But then wait for a bit longer until the rest of the Gentiles then would be slain. What it means is, in the future, the Gentiles are going to be completely destroyed outside of the camp. Only the set apart people then at the very end are going to survive in their camps, because it's time of vengeance. The adversary, Nahashtan the destroyer, is going to be released. When the atomic blast comes, that's the time when he's going to be released. At the moment, what is releasing from the spiritual line is the deceit. Satan, the deceit, the adversary, the deceit, is releasing himself from the spiritual nearing line, because people are becoming aware of the Hebraic understanding of salvation and Shavuot and the holy festivals and the Mikras, and then the spiritual line. So the spiritual line, Satan the deceiver is releasing himself from, because it's preparing then for vengeance. So then, the time that we are living at this time is the reduction of time ever since Yahshua spent a couple days with the Samaritans. So there are layers of understanding of the same topic. We have the first 1,000 years ruled by the Hebrews, from his ascension to 1009, and then the destruction of the most important symbol of his coming from the dead, the tomb in Jerusalem. It was destroyed. That time, Satan the destroyer was placed in a prison. However, his facet of deceiver had taken over the nearing line. And then in 2009, then the timing had expired. So we are living at this time in a reduction from the time he spent with the Samaritans couple days. He spent couple days with them. He was around maybe 32 years old, 31 and a half, 32 years old. So then calculate a couple thousand years from there, and then we are living in a reduction, because in Matthew the 24th, Yahshua said they would have a reduction of time for the benefit of the set apart. Because he knew that if vengeance would start, and then the set apart people, they were caught outside of their camps, would be deadly. Because Satan the destroyer is being released then later. So there are layers of understanding of the same topic. And there are other areas from the time of Daniel. Understand, there are very big numbers, time and another time and a half a time. But those, if you calculate from the time of Daniel, it fits perfectly from the time of then Revelation. Because it's also coming from the previous covenant. And they fit perfectly. From the time of Daniel was around 500 years prior of his birth of the Mashiach, then 500 years and then another couple thousand fits perfectly in Revelation. So there are many layers of the same topic. Those that have to be, placed on the top of each other. But then you understand layers of the same events at the same time. This is the Hebraic understanding rather than the Greco-Roman. The Greco-Roman, they try to place an area flat and then place on a side. They take another area flat and then they place on another side. Then take another area flat and then they try to make sure that those events each in its own. When no, they are in layers. They have the first, the second, and third layers going together at the same time. So then from the time of Daniel, 2,500 years, and then 2,000 is the time then that we are living minus the reduction. This is the time where the Hebrews must return to their camps, because vengeance is coming. Try to understand it from the prophetic timeline. Don't understand this area in a person that's trying to mesmerize the scriptures and try to manipulate. No, understand yourself the time, the prophetic time. Not in Greco-Roman, but in Hebrew. each of those areas as layers on the top of the same prophetic timeline. So then from Daniel, 2,500 years, goes to Revelation, precise on Revelation. Then from the time of ascension of Yahshua up to 1009, the first 1,000 years that they did rule. And then with the destruction of the tomb came then the world declaration. They don't want anything to do with the Mashiach. Then, because Satan couldn't destroy any further, that was the last point that he could have destroyed related with the Mashiach. Was the most important point. He had then to get rid of the entire system of them going out and forming holy lands. They had destroyed those. The last point to be destroyed was the tomb. So then he was placed, Satan the destroyer, the face of the destroyer went to prison. However, his facet of deceiver had taken over the nearing line. That's where we are living at the very end of it. So then from 1009 to 2009 is the time that ended the time of the deceit. Then there is the couple thousand years from the time he spent with the Samaritans. Also, it's another layer related with the same topic. So then we are living on a reduction of the time of the Gentiles for the benefit of the set apart, so they can return to their camps before the vengeance. And that's what was then the understanding from the Hebrews, the 7th chapter, 12th verse. Then the priestly line must maintain their duties as they did before. There was only a change in the instructions. Read the 7th chapter and then 12th verse, and then states, "But as there is a change in the priestly line, so also is there a change in instructions of the priestly line." They had to maintain their services. That's why then matches with the Revelation 29, 20th chapter, 9th verse. And the camps around the world. The camps is the very salvation plan that they themselves were saved from Egypt. So it begins to understand. So rather than having flat surfaces in each portion, in flat areas away from each other, no, place them in layers. And those big numbers from Daniel, simply they match Revelation. So then we understand the Hebrews, they have to have their understanding lined up with the previous covenant and the renewed covenant, that they must return to their camps. Because they have to release themselves from the trade of the Gentiles. This is what it means when they come to be set apart again. Because the time of deceit is nearing its end. The world is not going to be deceived anymore. They are becoming aware of the salvation plan from the time of the Creator when He rescued them from Egypt. So we are during these 1,000 years in the area of deceit. The world was deceived. But then people are becoming aware of that these set apart people, they must return to their camps because the time of the deceit is gone. People are becoming more aware of the plan of the Creator. So when the world then comes to completion in understanding the plan from the Creator, then the Hebrews must return to their camps before the vengeance starts. And in terms of the reduction of the time, nobody knows precisely when it's going to end, but not for very long. Do the calculation from the time that he spent with the Samaritans, around 31 and a half, 32 years old. Then a couple thousand years. Okay? Couple thousand years, then from 3999 he was born. So then he died in 4032, and then minus a year and a half when he spoke with the Samaritans. Then from there do a couple thousand years. Then have in mind that these couple thousand years, then the time is going to be reduced for the sake of the elect. So then they return to their camps, and they are preparing themselves then when the atomic blast comes, because then Satan the destroyer is going to be released. And that's when the actual autumn understandings of the revelation, then they are coming to place. And it started making sense. And every time is based upon the Hebraic understanding of layers. Layers of prophetic understanding. Every time the Hebrews, they understand the scriptures is in a prophetic sense. So they have to be in layers. So the time of deceit is ending. People are becoming aware of the Hebrews are not to be involved in a world's trade. They are to be in their camps as they were told. Because then through them, when they release themselves from the world's trade, then the Gentiles can govern themselves. And this is what it meant. It doesn't mean that they won't have any trouble. It means when there are troubles, then they would come to the gates of the Hebrews, and then they would inquire of Yahweh. And this is precisely what other nations did during the time of Solomon. So it's a shadow prophetic understanding. Because they would want to have the opinion of the kingdom to come government regarding their problems. So it started making sense. When people begin to think in a Hebraic understanding, then they begin to understand the prophecies. Because the 1,000 years then of the ruling of his people, it can't be from today, because the world is going to run out of resources. And people are not going to heaven. The judgment is to be made in the earth. And judgment is reserved only for Yahweh, the Creator. So then, revelation was made for the earth. Understand, revelation was made for the earth, not for heaven. So then, when he ascended, the first 1,000 years, his people then ruled, and they were in camps, obviously most of the time. They had to be, because they were taught during the time they left Egypt. There were also Hebrew brothers that were not in the camps, obviously. But the fundamental principle was there. And they were in camps. A lot of them, they were in camps. But they were being persecuted. And that's when Satan the destroyer was after them, to the point of destroying the tomb in Israel. Then he went to prison. Then the deceit part of him had taken over the nearing line. And this is the time that we are living in. There are other areas that explains also the nearing line. There are many other areas that can give us an understanding. On the 7th chapter of Hebrews, and then there is also for the instruction of the priests. We are talking about spiritual. This is spiritual. For the instruction of the priests made not the Torah perfect. They couldn't make the Torah perfect in themselves. They had to sacrifice often. But there has come in its place a hope, meaning that the people would be linked, relinked, and then they would wait until the end via the nearing line. And then by these we draw near to Elohim. Nearing line. That's when we have this nearing line of the spirit, but is contaminated with deceit. Try to understand it in the spirit, in a Hebraic understanding in the spirit. The nearing line that we used to have for Elohim, had it taken over by a deceit. That's why people then, they don't understand anymore the camps. Because the nearing line, the spiritual line, has deceit in it. But the deceit is releasing itself. Because the camps are returning. That's why it's important understanding from the Hebraic understanding, because every time there is speaking of priests, it is spiritual. It's not literal, it is spiritual. But the camps are literal camps. Because Yahshua said, then whatsoever Moses said for you to do and observe, these do and observe. Because he knew in the future they had to go out as people forming then lands around the world. And this is when the deceit then is released from then the nearing line. So then the Gentiles, they get proper ministrations. And these fake establishments out there that they say themselves church, they don't exist. Those were made during the time of the deceit. Try to understand. The time of the deceit. Prior to 1009, there were only camps. They were only taught by the Hebrews. Afterwards, the destruction of the tomb then became the nearing line with the deceit. Came deceit in the nearing line. And people were deceived. They think they are going to heaven when there is no heaven to go to. If they are not obedient to the instructions via faith in the capacity of the Gentiles, and then 100% obedient to the Torah in the camps, then a person is judged. It's practical. So the area of deceit then has ended in 2009, but there is the reduction of the time that when Yahshua spent with the Samaritans. But then people are becoming aware of that the camps are the only places where then the Savior Yahshua in the form of Yahweh Yeshua is living in. He is not wandering around. So then the Hebraic understanding began to make sense. And that's why then later Revelation, the 20th chapter, 9th verse, states the camps. Camps, that's plural, camps. Because whatsoever Moses said for them to do, they would be doing and observing. And then saving the Gentiles from the outside and shepherding them. Much more coming up.